Well, greetings to all of our friends and family, comrades, allies, and enemies out here. Welcome to this week's exciting episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program that is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the institution of Black August and its connection to the worldwide African Revolution. So we're glad that you are here to join us for this important topic. Of course, every August is Black August, where we commemorate our freedom fighters, our African freedom fighters here in the United Snakes of America, as well as those allies who worked with and supported our liberation struggle. And the discussion today is continuing to honor those courageous soldiers, but also to talk about what their work meant in the context of fighting for revolution. And what does that revolution look like on a worldwide scale? Because that's what we that's the vision that we see that is necessary for us to get us where we want to go. So we're glad that you're here. We hope that you are at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength, and want to just acknowledge the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We have done quite a bit of work over the last several weeks, actually. Shakur knows exactly what I'm talking about. And when we had African Liberation Day in Oakland in May, the end of May, and then we organized a follow-up event in the beginning of July in Oakland. And then over the last 8 days, we have organized two separate Pan African Women's Day events, one in Oakland a week ago, Saturday, and one yesterday here in Sacramento, Pan African Women's Day events. And sitting there last Saturday in Oakland at beautiful Lake Merritt, and then yesterday in the park here in Sacramento, looking at the scenery, being outside, it always makes me think of the indigenous people because we're in their land. So whenever I'm outside, whenever I'm out in the country, wherever we're camping, whatever the case may be, I'm always thinking about the indigenous people because when I look at the land out here, when I look at the beauty of it, I think of what they have endured as a people, what they have fought through, what they have had to deal with, and how they continue to fight for their forward progress. Now, unfortunately, one of the fights they have to engage in is many of our people claiming that they're indigenous to this hemisphere, which is completely not only disrespectful to the actual indigenous people, but it's disrespectful to our African ancestors. So just always, again, when I'm outside, I think about the indigenous people to this hemisphere and what they've had to endure and fight through in order to maintain their dignity. And so just want to acknowledge that, like that's always on my mind. And of course, connected to that is our own African ancestors. Of course, everything reminds me of them. Everything that I experienced, everything that I think about, everything that happens throughout the day, every day reminds me of them. There's so much in this society growing up here, there's so much here that is connected to our kidnapping and being brought to this hemisphere. So many things that most people have no clue about, right? Everything from the words that people speak, the meanings of certain words, the activities, the things that go on, the institutions in this backward society. So much of it is connected to what has happened to our people that it's impossible if you're conscious of that not to think about it. Like just I was watching something on television for a brief moment, a commercial during a sporting game that was going on, and they were talking about gumbo, and it made me think of gumbo. That's a word, that's a con word for okra. And these are the types of things like our people here don't, for the most part, have no idea about. And you could even meet an African here in the US who tells you they're not African, but they love gumbo and they call it gumbo, and their family has a tradition of making gumbo, which, and they have sickle cell anemia and, all these things that could connect to absolutely nothing except Africa. So always thinking about our African ancestors. And of course, when I think about them, it's only a question of what can I do and what can we do to capture the dignity that our ancestors fought so vigilantly to ensure that we had. And I think if you're not thinking about it like that, then you're not really even thinking about it. That's the only way to think about it, is how to continue to uplift the dignity of our people, that our ancestors passed on. If you have dignity today, it's only because our ancestors passed it on to you. You didn't create it yourself. Your mother and father didn't create it for you. It's a part of our legacy as a people. And so that's why, there's nothing you can do if you're conscious. If you have your head in the sand or up your rear end or something like that, then you're not going to be aware of any of these things I'm talking about. But if you're a conscious human being and you're striving to be a conscious human being, then these are the things that you will always be thinking about. So we just want to say our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored again by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, an independent revolutionary political party, the AAPRP, with its base in Africa. We are in the infantile stages of building this party. I mean, you have to understand it in its conceptual format. We are talking about a political party that is organizing African people everywhere we are on the planet Earth, almost 120 countries, in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Creole, Swahili, Wolof, Mandinka, Akan, all of these conditions on in all throughout Africa and Europe and the entire Western Hemisphere. This is what we're talking about. I mean, it's a major, major undertaking. It's a whole different level from just organizing your homeowners association or your bowling league or your church or whatever it is people do. It's a whole different undertaking than those things. And those of you that do those types of things, you're struggling to do that. So you can imagine how difficult it's going to be to build what we're talking about when we say Pan-African revolution. But we don't approach life from the standpoint of, oh, that's so difficult, we don't know if we can do that. We don't even talk like that. We don't even think like that. For us, the only question is, what do we need as a people? And once we resolve that, and for us, that argument is resolved, the answer is Pan-Africanism, revolutionary Pan-Africanism, then the only other question is, how do we get it? And so we engage in the work. We make errors, we make efforts, we make more errors, we learn things, we do things better, and that's how we'll move the needle to get us where we need to be. So the APRP is one of the vehicles that's fighting for this objective of revolutionary Pan-Africanism, which is defined as one united Africa under a scientific socialist government. That's the definition of Pan-Africanism. And our work to achieve it is outlined by many people, but we have specific people who have been very exact in their analysis. And Kwame Nkrumah was one of them. And in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, the cover page, which is displayed on the screen, he lays out a strategy for how we achieve Pan-Africanism. And the way that he identified that as being uniting all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations throughout Africa who agree that Pan-Africanism is one unified socialist Africa. And so this is the work that we do. And for those of us who don't currently live in Africa, there's plenty of work for us to do, to build onto this process. I just gave you. I mean, I'm obviously physically. I go to Africa often, but I live physically very far, thousands of miles and water away from Africa. But the work that I just described to you that we've done the last couple of months is focused around nothing else except uplifting African consciousness and building towards revolutionary Pan-Africanism. So it doesn't really matter where you are. you can make a contribution to this work, and we do that to the best of our ability every day. So this particular program, Our Ancestors Voices, is sponsored each week, every Sunday, same time, same platform, same place, and it's hosted by myself, Ajamu, and my biological daughter and ideological daughter, Shakura Umi, who is now Dr. Shakura Umi. So let's get started on this important topic for today, Black August and the African Revolution, and I'll turn it over to Shakura to get us going.
Thank you. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. I'm so excited to talk about this topic today. We actually, as Baba Jamu referred to, we had some beautiful edutainment yesterday at our Pan African Women's Day event. And part of the bio for the entertainers who presented mother daughter duet known as Straight Out Scribes. Dr. V.S. Chochezi, as well as her mother, Stajabu, long time entertainers in the Sacramento area, and have created quite a resume, if you will, of recorded media. So you all should definitely do some searches for them and check them out. But I bring them up because they also have made it part of their mission to represent the political prisoners who have been wrongly accused. And part of their work as alliance and as um, I would say advocates for what is right in terms of African prisoners, for example, is to continue to spread the word. And so they brought a card yesterday to the event and circulated it so that we could sign it on behalf of our comrade Mumia Abu Jamal. And so just kind of using that as a lens, right, to kind of help us focus on different ways that, we all can contribute. I also recall, before I jump into this slide, I also recall that in some cases, maybe you don't really know the full story of why the prisoner was falsely accused of a crime or why they were wrongly convicted or whatever that could be. But it's our responsibility to still investigate and to try to figure out what the truth and the base of justice is based on what really happened. And I highlight that because as a little girl, I remember getting in the car early on Saturday mornings to drive down to Dublin because my dad and my mom saw it as important for me to have this connection with my auntie and longtime comrade, Marilyn Buck, right? And you all know we've done seminars on Marilyn Buck before. We've also done seminars on Assata Shakur, and we've done seminars that have connected to the Black Liberation Army, where we talked about how because the Black Liberation Army was able to organize Assata's escape, it's because of the help of Marilyn Buck that they were able to do that. And being in a position where you understand what kind of role models you want to have in your life. I'm speaking from the vantage point of my dad being a parent, but even if you don't have children, you know what kind of people you want in your life. You know what kind of people you don't want in your life. If you don't know that yet, maybe you're still figuring that out. That's okay, but you can kind of assume that if these people were wrongly accused of saying that they did something that they did not do, and more importantly, they were doing something to stand for the people, there's probably a good assumption that you probably want to know more about them, especially if you're listening to this seminar right now. If you're listening to the seminar on accident, then maybe you don't want to learn more about them. But we would argue those are probably the people you do want to research, because instead of us focusing our time and energy on people who are insignificant and do not matter, let's try to learn about some of the comrades who sacrificed their life so that we could be in a better position ideologically, physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever, so that we can continue to organize and make a difference. We had a wonderful keynote yesterday. Dr. Mjiba Freewat, who's also a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union within the party. And she said, quite frankly, really, we should all be doing this work because we shouldn't be paying attention to the Dr. Shukuras and the Dr. Mjibas. We should understand that those are infinite people that are all contributing collectively on a mass level towards the greater good for humanity, towards eradicating oppression for all oppressed people, right? So hopefully we can get to a point where we're not just calling out the Dr. Martin Luther Kings and the Dr. Shukuras. Hopefully we'll get to a point where we don't need to necessarily mention Mumia Abu Jamal, because we understand that he was a part of something so much bigger that still needs to be maintained, you all. And therefore we still have a responsibility even after the story of Mumiga continues, but also gets replaced by some new political prisoner who unfortunately has still been wrongly accused and falsely accused. And so just kind of bringing that into this context, right? So, so important. And it's also important and relevant because that's really the best way to resist imperialism and capitalism, is to not make it about yourself, right? So we just want to kind of think about those things. And in case I didn't make that point clear earlier, just to say that you as a responsible adult, like you have a responsibility to figure out what is the missing information in your life that you don't have access to because you did go to a public school that was backed by capitalism. And that's okay. You now have a responsibility to investigate that. If you are a parent, you have a responsibility, like Baba Ajamu did, to take it upon yourself to engage your children in these kind of struggles where they can communicate with these folks who have been wrongly accused. There's all kind of letter campaigns. There's all kind of ways that you can learn more about their story and read more about them. Also, you can use your voice to write about them and to educate other people. So I'm sure Baba Ajamu will talk more about some of those options, but just kind of putting that in a context of our experience as a family and how that has again like contributed to me being on the path that I'm on, right? And so just kind of putting that in reality so we can kind of see that. So if you're not familiar with Black August, like African Liberation Day, Pan African Women's Day, Juneteenth, etc. These are our institutions, you all. For African people, these are our institutions. We should be celebrating them. We should be taking time off from work if we're able. We should still be contributing if we can't take time off from work and organizing on the weekends, passing out flyers, creating flyers, promoting on our social media campaigns, sending this flyer to different community members. However, we can spread the word, get the word out there, we should be doing that. We also had a comrade yesterday who actually had to work and could not come to the event. But you know what? We asked the comrade to bring our paper goods and our plasticware and organized it, excuse me, so they could drop off those things the Friday before. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Even if you're not in a position to come physically, you still have a responsibility because our institutions are everything. We need to protect them, we need to celebrate them, and we certainly need to perpetuate them and promote them. What we don't need to do is to celebrate the oppressor's institutions, right? That's what we don't need to do. So, yeah, these are institutions that we need to hold to a high regard, right? And to celebrate and to recognize and respect by any means necessary. These institutions signify the work that can help liberate African people. It also signifies work that has already liberated African people, even though we know our struggle is not complete. So these days should not be permitted, right? Where we need to be cooped into celebrations of anything, right? But reminders that our need to continue fighting is continuance on us understanding the contradictions with imperialism, the contradictions with capitalism, how all of these different forms of white supremacy can manifest themselves to where they can take on a patriarchal role from a white supremacy standpoint. They might even take on a perpetuated white supremacy role with people of color perpetuating it. Just like you have non-male people who can perpetuate patriarchy, and you have queer people who can perpetuate homophobia, right? So I want us to kind of push into that a little bit more and like really look at what that looks like. Even looking at the image on the screen, you got all these different faces here. We've got the Move Nine. We've got different folks there. We have Mamuya there. Like just different ways that we can kind of think about what is this work and how does it span across all these different ways that we can think about it. I would argue it's not enough for us to just say their names and recognize them, but to hold them in our primary focus as we continue to use them as a directed direction, right, of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and kind of picking their legacy up and moving with it, right? Doing the things that they have informed us of doing, picking up their biographies and reading about them, right? Being able to spread more information about it, finding ways that their books have inspired other people, their poems, their blogs, the different ways that they have gotten their words out, the different organizations that these folks have belonged to, you all, because that's also a common denominator. And, you know, we are always pushing for people to join some organization that is working for justice. Next slide, please. So don't forget that seeing what organizations they're a part of is always going to be a key factor with that. Okay, so we also want to kind of define like what we mean when we say liberation. So liberation is a means of the defeat of all forces that oppress us, meaning our fight against capitalist systems, imperialism, these different systemic oppressions that we find ourselves facing. Liberation means completely defeating any force that oppresses us by any means necessary, right? So we can think about African people being oppressed everywhere in the diaspora as well as on the continent, and everywhere that we exist. You can assume there is oppression connected to that, right? So even on the planet, like as a whole, we can assume that oppression exists for African people. So any institution whatsoever that we participate in that is not centering our struggle for liberation, it should be irrelevant to us in 2026 and beyond. We should be thinking closely, not just about our own liberation and our own oppressive eradication, but also how does our support financially give way to other institutions, excuse me, other organizations to oppress other individuals. Again, the comrade yesterday, the keynote spoke about how we all have these contradictions where we find ourselves supporting these entities that are problematic, like going to Starbucks. And if you know anything about Starbucks, you know that it's a Zionist organization, right? If you know anything about Target or Walmart, you know that these are imperialist corporations that are stealing resources all around the world, using them to create and to perpetuate and to cultivate the materials that they slap a profit on. Meanwhile, where they got those materials from in the first place, they have no intention of paying the land or the people that descend from the land, right? So being able to make those connections, you can see some examples here on the slide. By corporation, we mean efforts like Wells Fargo enriched in its shareholders by financing slave ships and plantations. And that was really interesting to me when you said that a couple of weeks ago, Baba Jama, because I knew that Wells Fargo had invested in our enslaved Africans as humans, but I did not know they also invested in the plantation ships themselves, right? And so that was just very interesting to learn when you said that. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, just very interesting to learn about that. And also the purchase of our ancestors, we just mentioned that, as well as how they can seriously commemorate our freedom from slavery. There's some companies on here that you may not have known about: Pepsi, Ready to Work, right? Community First, Natera. And you also might recognize, you all, some of these logos you probably have seen on the latest Juneteenth flyer, because we're not even organized as a people where we can even see those contradictions. We're not in a position where we own our resources. We need these organizations. Well, we don't need them, but we are falsely under the impression that we need them, to where they can provide financial support for us to pull off these big events that we want to pull off. That's why when you go to a Juneteenth, you will see a Wells Fargo booth or a Bank of America booth or some type of imperialist, bank of some type, because that's probably a big backer for allowing that organization to host that event there, right? And so just think about the contradiction of that. Think about the contradiction of these banks, right? Think about Aetna, right? The insurance company who made a huge profit taking out insurance policies, creating insurance policies, I should say, for plantation owners to take out on their enslaved Africans because they were considered property, right? So just think about Aetna, think about Bank of America, Wells Fargo having their tables there as a vendor at our Juneteenth event. Do you all see how crazy that sounds? Think about the company Master Lock. They were responsible for creating. They were responsible for creating the shackles, and just think about them having a table there. I just think that that is absolutely absurd. It would be like us going to a Palestinian event and the Israeli people having a table there. Like that's not the direction that we want to move in. But this is exactly why we need to get control of our land and our resources, you all. Because if we're not careful, they will convince us that we need them and that we should be happy that they want to be a vendor there because they're proud of us and they want to celebrate our liberation. That's not it at all. They're just trying to get you to sign up for a bank account so they can continue to profit off of you, build interest off of your money, right? That's all that is. That is all that is. So, yeah, we just kind of have to think about that a little bit deeply, you all. And this is why it's important to like understand these fundamental concepts, but also to join an organization that's working for justice so that you can start to think more critically about what it means to really synthesize these contradictions that are alive and well, unfortunately, right? So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Baba Ajamu. I just wanted to say with August, we need to continue to celebrate Black August. Let's continue to celebrate Pan African Women's Day, and let's perpetuate these institutions and put them on our calendars, you all, so that we can be a rotation of celebrating them and take off the other ones because they're not necessary.
Ashe, Obrigada, Asante Sana, Medasi, Ngoni. So let's focus on Black August for a second, because I think that when we say institutions, so we're really, and I know, Shakura, you mean by celebrate, acknowledge them, but we're really not celebrating. Like what we're doing is using these institutions to inspire us to continue to work, right? Like you don't, if you have to do work, it's not, I just want to clarify, put that out there, because I think the way we're conditioned, when we hear celebration, we think party and, have a good time. And yeah, this work, you have a great time doing this work. But I think I want to underline the point that we're talking about institutions that can inspire us to want to do more, to commemorate our people's struggle for justice, and to fight for the better conditions for our people, to carry our struggle forward, right? And I start with just talking about Ancestor Sekou Odinga, who of course is a perfect example of why Black August is so important. A former member of the New York Black Panther Party, a key person in the Black Liberation Army. There would have been no liberation of Assata Shakur without Sekou. He was the core person, the leader, the planner of the entire operation to get Sister Assata out of prison in New York and to get her into the underground and eventually into Cuba, where she lived the last 42 years of her life before her physical transition almost a year ago, next month. Without Sekou Odinga, that never would have happened. And so when we say commemorate Black August and our institutions, we're talking about lifting up people like Brother Odinga, Ancestor Odinga, and recognizing that these are the people that we need to educate our children about. We all know Chris Brown. All of our children know Chris Brown and Rihanna. All of our children know Kendrick Lamar. All of our children know all of these people, right? Drewski and all of these clowns. But none of our people know Sekou Odinga. None of our people know Matulu Shakur. None of our people know Sundiata Akoli. None of our people know Nehanda Abanan. None of our people know any of these freedom fighters that fought for our forward liberation. And it's so bad at this point that a lot of us actually believe that whatever these people did, it doesn't really have anything to do with our life. When every benefit you have is because of the sacrifices these people made. Back when Dr. Martin Luther King was meeting with then President Lyndon Johnson to talk about our struggle for liberation, and King was making every effort he could to emphasize to Johnson that we needed some victories in the civil rights movement. And the tactical argument that King made to Kennedy and Johnson was that if you don't work with me, then you're going to have to deal with them. And the them was the more radical, more militant element of our movement. Now, in the early 60s, that was pretty much the Nation of Islam. And the spokesperson at that time for the nation up until late 1963, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz Malcolm X. King used that tactic a number of times. Like, you're going to have to deal with me or you're going to be left with him. And then, of course, a few years later, that became even more pronounced with the emergence of the Black Power movement, of which, these folks were talking about, like Ancestor Sekou Odinga came out of. And King continued to use that argument. And the point of that is that Black August was initiated to recognize our comrades who engaged in struggle against the U.S. capitalist empire. No question about that. But I'm not so much going to talk about how you can write the political. You should do that. You should write the political prisoners. You should raise money for their families. You should do all of those things. They made the ultimate sacrifice for us, and they and their families should be supported. You should sign 1 million cards for Comrade Brother Mumia Abu Jamal. You should do everything you can to support efforts to get him released from prison. You should do all of that work. But there are elements who are engaged in doing those things. Shakur just mentioned our wonderful sisters, straight out scribes here, who I've known them for decades here in this area, and they've been doing that work as long as I've known them, which goes back to at least the early 90s, if not the 80s. So there are people who are doing that work. Because we are revolutionary organizers, I want to take it a little different take on it and suggest that we should look at Black August not as just a commemoration of those fallen soldiers like Sekou Odinga, like Mumia Abu Jamal, although that's without question important. And I don't think anybody has done a, a a job better than what we've done with this program to educate thousands of people about people like Mumia and about people like Sekou Odinga and Mutulu Shakur. I don't think anybody's done any better, George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, than we have in doing that, not just with this program, but the many articles that I've written about it, which have been widely published, and the many events we've done where we've talked about it. So we certainly, it's demonstrated that we certainly understand the importance of talking about their contributions and encouraging people to support them and their families. But what I find in the work that's not often talked about is what was the significance of Huey P. Newton, the co-founder and I would argue the chief ideologue for the Black Panther Party. What was the significance of the work of Huey P. Newton? What was the significance of the work of Assata Shakur, Jonathan Jackson, George Jackson, Sekou Odinga, all of our political prisoners and people? What was their significance? And I would argue that what makes all of those people relevant is that they were fighting for a new reality for us. They were fighting for revolution. That's why they were pursued by the state. That's why they were arrested. That's why they were incarcerated. That's why these things happened to them, because they were fighting for revolution. They were not fighting to run for political office. They were not fighting to be a part of the school board. They were not fighting to become the police chief. They were not fighting for those things. And I'm not the person to tell you whether you should be fighting for those things or not. My point is that Black August is about revolution. That's my part. Because everybody we talk about that we commemorate for Black August was a revolutionary. Sekou Odinga was a revolutionary. One of the revolutionaries that I do my best to pattern my life after, because I think that his level of focus, vision, discipline, all of those things, his courageousness, these are the things that I think if we had 10,000 people that had those same uh, characteristics that Comrade Brother Sekou Odinga had, we would be so much farther along than we are right now. So these people were revolutionaries and are revolutionaries. That's why the state pursues them like it does. That's why they stay in prison as long as they do. I know for a fact because, like Shakur mentioned, spent a lot of time visiting, writing Marilyn Buck. She was a white woman, but she was very intricately involved in a number of activities that highlight the significance of Black August. She was centrally involved in the appropriation efforts that the Black Liberation Army carried out, the achieving of gaining money from the system, from the banks, from the armored cars so that they can finance the revolutionary work. She was arrested in the early 80s for engaging in that work, and she escaped from prison. And then, of course, she was ultimately arrested and charged with not only the 1981 Brinks car robbery, but the escape of Asada Shakur, her being an accessory in the escape of Asada Shakur, uh, uh, along with brother Matulu and Sekou Odinga. So, having visited her and talked to her, I know that she had several parole hearings over the years. She was in prison the second stint for 33 years until she was released in 2010 for what they call a so-called compassionate release. And then she had cancer and made her physical transition just 3 short weeks after she was released from prison. But because she was so ill. But I know from visiting her and talking to her, she had a number of parole hearings where she engaged in where they sit you down and they talk about whether you're someone they want to consider to be released from prison. And I know from talking to her, I never talked about this because I didn't talk about this stuff while these people were alive because obviously you don't want to bring more challenges down on them. But one of the things she used to tell me is that they would always, I never asked her anything. She offered this information, and she would tell me that they asked her during these hearings every time, and she had multiple ones, who helped? Who else helped? We know there were other people that helped with the rescue of Asada Shakur. Who else helped? If you tell us, we'll give you uh, points on your sentence. In other words, you'll get released sooner. And she, of course, refused to ever reveal any names and tell them anything. But my point for telling you that is that the reason why this was important to the state is because they knew that Asada Shakur escaping their clutches is an inspiration to young revolutionaries all over the world, not even just African revolutionaries, because all kind of people are inspired by the example of Asada Shakur escaping the clutches of the state. And they knew that. Even if we don't understand that, they understood that clearly. And they don't want you to be inspired. That's why Obama, when he met with Raul Castro in 2014, told him, like, we can talk about relaxing the crippling effects of the U.S. economic embargo against Cuba if you would just consider returning Asada. Of course, he called her Joanna Chesmar. They don't recognize our free names, our African names, but he told her if you would just consider returning a Joanne Chesimard to us, we'll talk about lifting these crippling. And we've talked in great detail about the dignity and integrity of the Cuban Revolution, even though they would have definitely benefited from that had they done it. They refused to do it. Raul's words to Obama were, "That's not on the table. We're not talking about that. We're people of principle." I know I lost people saying that because a lot of us wouldn't know what principle was if it slapped the hell out of us. But this is what revolutionaries are, people of principle, fighting for a new society and understanding that in that fight, you constantly run the risk of paying consequences. There are consequences to standing up to the state. And all of these people understood that and paid a tremendous price. Sekou Odinga spent decades in prison because of his contribution, but he knew, and I met him after he got out of prison in Oakland. And it was clear that he I'm not going to say that he was like, it was worth it. I'm not saying that, but it was clear from just listening to him talk. And I didn't ask him any questions. It's not my place to ask him any questions, but I listened to him. And just listening to him talk, it was clear that he understood his mission. He understood what he was doing. He wasn't confused. He didn't get up there after he got released from prison and say, "Well, I shouldn't have done that with Asada Shakur. I should have, stayed away from that." He didn't do that. He understood exactly what he was doing when he decided to take that action. And he was proud to play a leading role in that. And even though he had to spend 30 plus years in prison because of it, he still recognized the importance of what he did because getting Asada out like that was a significant contribution to helping us frame the necessity to fight against our enemy. They understood that. They talked about it. They planned around it. They understood that they wanted to give us an example to illustrate that the empire could be defeated. A simple symbol that the empire was not invincible. It could be battled against, it could be defeated. That's why they did the work to get Asada out of prison. You should study it if you didn't know that. That's why they did it. They didn't do all that because they just wanted to, they didn't have anything to do on a Saturday afternoon and they decided to do something dramatic. No, they understood. They understood technically why they thought it was important. And if you look at today, there's no question that they were correct. There are millions of people who weren't even born when Asada Shakur was busted out of prison, weren't even thought of, who looked to her as an inspiration. An inspiration for what? That we can win. That's what it was about. That we can win. We can fight this beast and we can win. And I'm pointing this out because I think oftentimes the way I hear people talk about Black August today is that they don't even talk about it in the context of the current fight that we're engaging in to fight against empire. They just talk about the individuals who have engaged in that fight over the last couple of decades and nothing about what we need to do to continue that fight to move forward. And I'm saying that's why the people were persecuted because of the fight. And so if we're not talking about the fight, we're not really respecting and acknowledging their contribution. This is what they wanted. This is clearly what Sekou Odinga wanted. This is clearly what Brother Matulu wanted. This is clearly what Sundiata Akoli wanted. This is clearly what Mumia Abu Jamal wants. This is what Jamil Abdullah Alameen wanted. This is what Marilyn Buck wanted. Clearly, none of those people fell over and gave in to the state. None of those people became born again Republicans and talked about the beauty and greatness of the American capitalist system. None of them did that. They were committed to the very end to tearing this goddamn beast down. And so we need to continue to see Black August in that tradition. That's what it's about. The only purpose of an institution is to inspire us to continue fighting, not to engage in you don't celebrate your birthday because you just want to look at all the things that have happened in your life up to this point. You celebrate your birthday because you're still here and you have the potential to do even greater things. That's the whole point. Otherwise, it doesn't serve any purpose. We already know about your past. We don't need to come together every year to talk about your past. We know about that. It's about the opportunity to do things in the future. This is the reason why we commemorate people's born days when they're not even physically here anymore. That's why we talk about May 19th, Malcolm X's birthday, not because, oh, okay, that's his birthday. He's been dead 60 years. That wouldn't make any sense. The reason why we still continue to commemorate his born days and will always do that is because he represents an example of our fight for freedom and forward human progress. That's the only point. That's the only reason why we know who the man is. That's the only reason why it's relevant. It's because of what we can and will do to advance our struggle for justice. So every institution we have, if it's not focused around that, it doesn't serve any purpose. It serves no purpose whatsoever. Black August, our struggle for liberation. That's the point. Juneteenth, it's not about slavery ending 150 years. Who gives a damn about that? Especially since so many of us today act more like slaves than the people who were actually enslaved 150 years ago. So clearly, Juneteenth just can't be about slavery ending because a lot of Negroes out here are just as happy to be slaves for the master today as they could be. They wish they could figure out ways to be better slaves for the master. They think that this is the greatest country on earth, and they're just so happy to be sitting here gobbling up the spit and the vomit coming from the master's mouth. So clearly, Juneteenth can't be about talking about slavery ended. The only relevance of it is that it gives us a vision for what our ancestors had in mind. That old cracker Abraham Lincoln, he made it clear that the Emancipation Proclamation had to happen for two reasons. One, because we were revolting against those crackers, left and right. And two, the ones of us who weren't standing up and fighting them were running away and getting away from them. Both of those things made the institution of chattel slavery untenable for the future. He said that. The cracker said that. I'm not the one saying that. So, because of that, that's the proof that Juneteenth is simply a question of us moving forward. And no question that African Liberation Day, without any debate, is a question of us fighting for our worldwide unity and liberation. Every institution we have is about that. So when we talk about Black August and African liberation, that's what we're talking about, because Black August is a critical portion of the Black Power movement in this country. You know, as Kwame Ture correctly stated, when he talked about his activism, he was asked about, you know, where he stood in the 90s after the Black Power movement in the 60s. His answer was Black Power, because, you know, the person interviewed him, like, you know, we don't understand anything in its entirety. We just understand portions of things, and we don't understand their connection to anything. And so this African reporter was asking him, it seems like you moved to Africa, you abandoned Black Power. And Kwame looked at him like, you know, so strange. And he said, the highest expression of Black Power is Pan-Africanism. I didn't abandon Black Power, I've built upon it. And that's what we have to understand about Black August. And so, as the crude illustration on the screen represents, we have all of these things. We have Black nationalism, right? We have the new African independence movement, right? We have Black August, and we have Pan-Africanism. And the point we're making is that all of those things are interconnected. You might say, well, I'm a Black nationalist. I want to stay here in the US. I want to fight for a nation for African people, new African people here in the US. We are, we have no problem with you. We can work with you and help you. We that's not what we're fighting for. We think the center of our struggle is Africa. But that's fine. We can have both. We can do both, long as you work it out with the indigenous people. That's the only thing that we ask. But we can do both things. There's no contradiction in that. But it's all about fighting for our forward progress. And Black August is simply a vehicle for us to do that. So whether cadres see the objective as revolutionary Pan-Africanism, the new African independence movement, Black nationhood within the US, or some version of all three, or none of those three, or something else, even the people that are fighting for a multiracial society, they can still use Black August as inspiration to engage that fight. Even those fighting for electoral progress, they can still use Black August. They should use it to figure out how to maintain some integrity for our people from a nationalist standpoint. They should use it like that to elevate consciousness. So we want to do that with Black August and focus more on the movements, because a lot of people will talk about Black August and they're not even in organizations. And I say to people all the time, how can you say you respect Black August? All the people that you commemorate in Black August were in organizations. None of them were on their own like you, individually running their mouth. They were all a part of collective organization that was fighting for our liberation. Name me one person that wasn't. Name me one person. Matulu Shakur organization. Sekou Odinga organization. Mumia Abu Jamal organization. Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army organization. Omari Obadeli organization. Republic of New Africa organization. Everybody you associate with Black August organization, right? Organization. That's what it is. Huey P. Newton organization, the Black Panther Party. George Jackson, Field Marshal, Black Panther Party. Angela Davis was a member of the Communist Party USA in those days. Organization. You don't have to agree with it. That's not the point. The point is that Black August equals organization, people fighting to change this society. That's what it means. Organization, Chokwe Lumumba, New African Peoples Organization. Organization, Jamil Abdul Alameen, formerly H. Rap Brown, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Black Panther Party. Organization, Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Park Carmichael, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Black Panther Party, All African People's Revolutionary Party, Democratic Party of Guinea. Organization. That's what it means. Ajamu Umi, All African People's Revolutionary Party. African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau. Shakura Umi, All African People's Revolutionary Party. All African Women's Revolutionary Union. Organization, not individualism. Not, I'm just going to write one letter and then I hope it works out for everybody after that. I'm not going to do anything else. That's not what Black August is about. It's about organization for a better society for African people. And then we can decide for ourselves what that better society means. For me, it's one unified socialist Africa. For you, it might be 5 states in the US South. We don't need to argue that. The people will decide what they want to do. I have no interest in arguing that question. What I do have an interest in is getting more of us engaged so that we can do the work, whatever direction we go in. I am interested in that. I am interested in that. So that's what we have to understand about this process, right? And so, how do we move forward? What do we do? If we really want to commemorate Black August, we have to make a primary part of what we talk about every August. How do we increase our collaboration to work better together? Like we should be doing collaborative events with all these organizations we got. APRP, African People's Socialist Party, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, all these organizations we have that say that we're dedicated to fighting for the emancipation of African people. We should be doing more collaboration. All the other groups that I don't have time to name, we should be doing more collaboration, and we should have huge events where we invite people and we can have people sign up for whatever one they want to sign up for. And I'm going to tell you right now, because I'm not in this fight for egotistical reasons. If we had an event like that or a series of events and we had 2,000 people come and we signed up all 2,000 of those people, all 2,000 of them signed in, and 1,000 of them signed up, if it was just those three organizations I mentioned, and 1,000 signed up to join the African People's Socialist Party, and 1,000 signed up to join the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, and 0 signed up to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You know what? It would be the happiest day of my life because I'm not in this fight for egotistical reasons. I'm not in this fight because I think that what we're talking about is the only thing worth talking about. I'm in this fight because I know our people have to get organized. And if that means that they want to organize with those organizations, then I say hallelujah, congratulations, do that. Because before that day, those 2,000 people were not organizing in any organization. And so, or maybe one or two of them, but most of them wouldn't have been. And so if 1,000 of them join one organization, 1,000 join the other organization, that makes us collectively stronger. That makes my work objectively easier, even though I'm not doing the same work that those two organizations are doing. I don't understand why we can't understand that. I don't understand why we cannot understand that. That's what it's all about. It's not an ego trip. So we have to have that kind of work taking place, you all. We have to have the inclusion of serious political education happening. Ignorance cannot be a flex. Our people running around here in this country, we're so ignorant. And we're so proud of being so dumb about everything. We've got to challenge this. And the way we do it is through organization. These, I'm sure, FBI inspired campaigns on social media about this foundational Black American nonsense, all that stupidity. I'm sure that's coordinated, but it's organized. It's everywhere on social media. We have to get organized to combat those ideas with ideas that make sense, We have to do that. We're not organized. We only have a small element of us who are fighting back against that on a consistent basis. So that's what we need. We have to do all of the above. We have to articulate objectives and histories of all the African movements, and we have to do that in a way that gives people enough of an understanding so they can decide what they want to do, right? The whole objective meaning getting more and more of our people involved. And this is where we have to go. These weaknesses have to be addressed. That's how we have to start looking at Black August with those objectives in mind. That's how we have to start looking at African Liberation Day, at Juneteenth, at any institution that we have. It's not about the past, it's about where we're going. Me being an African is not about, I'm not even well versed in ancient African civilizations. I'm not interested in that. My being an African is a political definition, it's about where we're going. And everybody wants, someone asked me yesterday, well, where did the term Africa come from? And I told them, look, you can call it the Twerkland if you want to. Then we're Twerkland people. I don't care what you call. Our point is we have to be connected to that land base. You can argue the next 100 years where the name, I don't care, name it whatever you want. We just have to be connected to whatever that name is, if that name is connected to that land base that we currently know as Africa. That's the point. That's how we move forward as a people. So we want to thank you for joining us today. We want to invite you back next week, Sunday, August 16th, same platform, same time, same place, where we talk about Marcus Garvey and the Watts Rebellion. Marcus Garvey's born day is August 17th. And of course, the Watts Rebellion happened on August 11th, 1965. So we're going to talk about the commonalities between those two, that historic figure and that historic event. So join us for that. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner, the red and white one, you can scan it and you can go to our Forward Ever shop where you can buy clothes that have revolutionary slogans on them. This helps us finance our work in the APRP and the AAWRU. I forgot again, Shakur, to put the union logo. I will remember for next week. It will be up there. And then also, you can go to hoodcommunist.org, which is a revolutionary Pan-Africanist blog. Definitely write for them. Definitely contribute to them. It's important to do that. And if you're in this area in Sacramento, California, Northern California, the Bay Area, anything out here, then we invite you to come to our community defense classes that are free every Thursday night from 6 to 8 p.m. The address is 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15, 2775 Cottage Way, like cottage cheese, Unit 15 here in Sacramento. 6 to 8, this Thursday, we'll be talking about Black August. We'll be talking about it, and then we spend like 15, 20 minutes doing that. And then we're going to be practicing getting better at our ability to throw proper punches, helping people understand how to throw effective kicks, how to dodge punches and kicks, how to spar, how to escape when someone grabs you, all of these things that are very useful. So come on out. And if you don't know people in this area, tell them about it. Encourage them to come. It's hard to get our people to come to this kind of thing because we operate under the illusion that nothing's going to happen to us. We're free. Nothing's going to happen to us. And we're the first one attacked. And when it happens, we don't have a damn clue what to do other than pick out our phones and start talking about we're going to call the police. Then we call the police come and they jump on us harder than the racist crackers did. And then we want to get on TV whining about, I'm so sick of hearing that. I don't want to hear it. Get yourself prepared. You're at war, goddammit. Get yourself ready so you can defend yourself. I'm sick of turning on the TV and hearing you whining about how they should do you like that. They should terrorize you if you're so crazy in the head that you don't understand that we are at war in this backward ass society, and you got to get prepared. And you got people out here offering you free time and services to prepare you, and you would rather go have happy hour. Well, when you leave that happy hour, they should whoop your ass if you're that crazy. I'm sorry if that makes you mad. I hope it does make you mad. Join the AAPRP, www.aaprp-intl.org. They ain't gonna whoop my ass the same way. I'll tell you that. That's not gonna happen so easily. They might get me, but they're gonna remember it if they do. Oh my God, I don't know if I want to do that again. That was desperate. That was, man, that was a lot that I got put on me. You can do the same thing. We're showing you for free, so come on out. Burkina Books, the QR code in the bottom right, black and white one. That's our work in the Sahel region in Africa, in Burkina Faso and Niger. We want you to be a monthly sponsor so we can buy revolutionary literature for our people, so we can get organized. We had our organizer from Burkina Faso speak at Pan African Women's Day in Los Angeles yesterday. I haven't heard the report. I'm sure it was a wonderful event. We had our comrade sister from Ghana, Dr. Mjiba Firwat here, and she rocked the house here in Sacramento yesterday. So we were so fortunate to have her here. We appreciate that. And then the last thing is my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's only $8 paperback, $5 digital. 100% of the proceeds go towards this work that we do. So, we had a lot of work we had to do. The Pan African Women's Day events we did last week in Oakland and yesterday in Sacramento. And a lot of those resources from me come from, I supply a lot of resources for the work that we do, a ton of resources. And I do that from the proceeds I get from the book. So even if you bought the book, get people to buy it, tell people about it. Obviously, it's not going to be in Oprah's book club. So we need your help here. So let people know about it, tell them about it. Uh, Form book clubs to read it, or even if you don't want to be in a book club, help other people form it. Get it, call your bookstore, have them order it. They can sell it for $12 and make a good, surplus from it. Get it in your bookstores, get it in your libraries. This helps us do this work. We really appreciate it if you would do that. We cannot express how thankful we are to you if you could help us in that regard. We wish you a good rest of your day. Forward ever, backwards never.